The gloves are off. The campaign is on. Kamala Harris hitting the campaign trail, wasting no time going after Donald Trump. In her first rally since securing enough delegates to clinch the nomination in the battleground state of Wisconsin, there were reported 3,000 voters waiting to greet the vice president. There was so much interest, in fact, in attending this rally that Harris's campaign said they had to find a larger venue at the last moment. And that crowd was energized. They were fired up. They clearly are enthusiastic and excited about the first Black and Asian woman who is now headed towards the top of the Democratic ticket.
In this campaign, I promise you, I will proudly put my record against his any day of the week. I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators who abused women, fraudsters who ripped off consumers, cheaters who broke the rules for their own gain. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type. We each have the power to answer that question. And in the next 105 days, then we have work to do. We have doors to knock on. We have phone calls to make. We have voters to register. And we have an election to win.
I mean, you can hear how that crowd responded. And then listen to this. But with just 15 weeks until the election, Harris is now trying to define herself and to do it really quickly before Republicans do it for her. Today, former President Trump repeatedly going after Harris.
She's the same as Biden, but much more radical. She's a radical left person, and this country doesn't want a radical left person to destroy it. She's far more radical than he is. She wants open borders. She wants things that nobody wants.
Well, as for President Biden, he is now back at the White House for the first time since he dropped out of the race. And of course, since he had COVID when he was on the campaign trail in Las Vegas last week. Just think about this. What has happened in such a few short days? Tonight, preparing to address the nation in tomorrow's primetime Oval Office speech about his decision to abandon his campaign for re-election. MJ Lee is out front live outside the White House to begin our coverage tonight. And MJ, what do you expect to hear from Biden? And also, you know, what is his feeling watching the Harris campaign? Just on day one, you hear that energy and that roar in the room as he watches that.
Yeah, Aaron, what we are learning tonight is that the president has begun working on his Oval Office address that he'll deliver tomorrow, started working on it while he was isolating in Rehoboth, a speech that is no doubt going to be one of the most consequential of his decades-long political career so far. And sources say that he will use the speech to elaborate on his decision to drop out of the 2024 race. Of course, we did see that letter from the president on Sunday, but we really haven't gotten a full explanation of how he got to that clearly painful decision. We are also learning that he will use the speech to lay out his agenda for the remaining 6 months or so that he has left in office, though in terms of how specific he will be, we don't know yet, including how he envisions using potentially his executive power with the time that he has left. But the president is now, Aaron, a lame duck president, and there's no question that in the coming weeks, he is going to be turning his attention to the idea of his legacy and what that legacy of the one-term presidency is going to look like. But as one source was telling me, he dropped out just 2 days ago. It is too early, and those discussions have not started yet in earnest. But we have seen, as you were saying, just such a remarkable change in the 2024 campaign just overnight. You know, you and I were in that speech in Racine, Wisconsin, just out of Milwaukee when you interviewed him that day. And that was just, Aaron, 2.5 months ago. And you'll remember, you know, he did get a warm reception from the crowd, but it was nothing like that that raucous reaction that we just heard Vice President Kamala Harris getting in Milwaukee earlier this afternoon. And we have done so much reporting over the past few weeks on how much Democrats watching the president's public appearances had been worried. There was sort of a holding your breath kind of experience watching his public speeches and watching Kamala Harris on the campaign trail. It is very, very clear that she is a very different presidential candidate than the president, Aaron.
All right, MJ, thank you very much. And MJ pointing out just the difference, the size of that crowd, the roar. I mean, that is something that we have not yet seen on the Democratic side in this election season until right now.
You saw that energy at Kamala Harris's first campaign rally, where she announced she had the best fundraising day in American campaign history. How are you thinking about this remarkable shift among the Democrats in just the past 2 days?
Oh, free at last, free at last. Kamala Harris is unleashed. She's just brilliant. She's just, the energy that's coming off of her is the energy that's coming off of the American people. Look, I mean, this is 2008 vibes already. She's done in literally 48 hours things that were considered impossible. She got the nomination. She took over cultural, she's a cultural phenomenon now. TikTok loves her. She raised more money than anybody. She signed up 50,000 people. You can do your whole career and not get 50,000 volunteers. She did it in 48 hours. You are witnessing the birth of a cultural phenomenon, and you need a cultural phenomenon to stop a cultural phenomenon. Donald Trump is a cultural phenomenon. So now you've got two superpowers colliding, but this one just came out of nowhere. Listen, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, people were like, Kamala Harris, I don't know, she can't win, I don't like her, blah, blah, blah. All those people are marching in line and getting in formation. It's unbelievable to watch.
It's very impressive indeed. And David Chalian, we take a look at some of these numbers. 1.1 million individual donors just in the past couple of days or so. 62% of them, that's about 680,000 individuals here in the United States, were first-time contributors. So how does the Harris campaign keep this momentum going?
Well, it's going to be tough to keep the momentum going at the level that you shoot out of the launch with. That is true for most campaigns, but they are going to have to find ways to keep resupplying more new donors, more grassroots activism, more volunteer signups, and they will aim to do so. The reality is those metrics, Wolf, are they're not just talking points. I mean, this is real. This is those contributions, the signups. Those are real numbers that show a different kind of enthusiasm. Biden's campaign was suffering from a pretty significant enthusiasm gap. That has completely closed right now.
Certainly has. Very impressive indeed. Ashley Ellison, you heard Kamala Harris really draw on her experience as a prosecutor. She was the Attorney General in California, District Attorney in San Francisco. How effective do you think this line of attack against Trump is?
Well, she draws on that experience because of how large the Department of Justice of California is. It's the second largest in the country, just after the actual Department of Justice. I think it's important because the contrast of her being a prosecutor and Donald Trump being convicted of 34 felony accounts and potentially counting if other cases actually come to trial is significant. I also think, though, it can draw a contrast between people who have been involved in the criminal justice system. 1 out of 3 people know someone in America that has been a part of the criminal justice system. 1 out of 5 people in America have actually interacted with the criminal justice system. Those individuals don't get immunity like Donald Trump is getting from the Supreme Court. Those individuals don't get to skip their sentencing day, which happened on July 11th. Those individuals don't have the system actually work the same way as Donald Trump. And so there are multiple contrasts that Kamala Harris can draw between her and Donald Trump and the American people and how they don't have the same lived experience as Donald Trump.
Yeah, she's really going after him on that line of attack. Matt Mowers is with us as well. Matt, it was interesting. I thought that Trump, what he said today, he said he's ready to debate Kamala Harris, but he's not going to do it on ABC, which he had earlier agreed to do if Biden was going to be the Democratic presidential nominee. So he's not going to do ABC. He doesn't trust ABC, he says. How do you read that between the lines?
Well, I think, candidly, he's got to find a new agreement if he wants to debate Kamala Harris the same way she will. It would not have been surprising if Donald Trump chose to debate Joe Biden again. I think he's going to honestly make a cold, hard political calculation about whether he debates Kamala Harris. And if polling is the same in September as it is today, where he's leading nationally, he's leading in every key swing state. New Quinnipiac poll came out today showing him with the most popular he's ever been among the American people. At the same time, when Kamala Harris was -14 in that same poll in her favorable rating, I don't know why he's going to debate her, because he's going to look at this and say, I'm going to win this election.
You think he's afraid to debate her?
I don't think he is. And at least at a personal level, I don't think he is. And I don't believe his core supporters believe he is either. I mean, it's clearly going to be a very different debate. You're going to actually have a Democratic nominee show up. Does she perform well or not? That's a different story, but she'll at least be there in a way that President Biden clearly was not at the end of June. But I don't think he's afraid of debating her. He has very great confidence in his debate abilities. I don't think Donald Trump's afraid personally to go up against anyone.
And in fact, I think he said today, Wolf, that he believes that the American people do deserve debates between their candidates, and he seems fully like he's moving ahead, prepared to.
I don't think people should decide whether or not they should debate people based on their polling numbers. I think that when you decide to be a candidate, you should get up and debate your opponents. Donald Trump wouldn't do that in the primaries. He definitely should do that with Kamala Harris. We as voters deserve that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people agree with you on that. Van, Republicans today are trying to distance themselves from some lawmakers' supposedly racial attacks on Kamala Harris. But listen to what Trump told reporters this afternoon about Harris's debate against Biden back in the 2016 election cycle. Listen to this.
She was by far the nastiest to Joe Biden. That's why I was so surprised that he took her. There was nobody nastier than her. She played the race card at a level that you rarely see. And she really was very nasty to him, and then he picked her. So I don't get that exactly. Now they act like they're great friends, but you don't really recover from that.
So what do you make of that, Van?
Oh, that's his favorite word to use about women. Nasty, 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 like he's Janet Jackson or something. Look, here's reality. The Republican Party is going to have to resist its worst impulses to make this a racial, gender, trash truck of insult and innuendo against this candidate. I don't want to hear it. She checked the box by winning at the local level. I voted for her at the local level in San Francisco when she was my district attorney. I voted for her when she was attorney general in California. I voted for her as a senator. I voted for her as vice president. What more boxes can you check? The only people who've been giving her special treatment are voters who keep electing her. And so I don't want to hear it. And the Republicans who are smart will separate themselves from this nasty stuff really quickly, and the ones who are not will go along with it. Let's have a straight-up competition. Someone who's won at the local, state, and federal level, who's served with honor and distinction, versus somebody who has been a con artist his whole life and who led an insurrection. Nobody has to insult anybody's race or gender. Let's just put the records out there and have a clean fight. But the Republican Party will tarnish itself irrevocably. By the way, Republican Party has been trying to get black folk over there, trying to get black men over there, trying to get Latinos over there. They're going to lose all of that if they start insulting black women the way that they're starting this yesterday.
Ashley, what do you think?
Look, a week ago we were at the RNC and we all said we were going to turn the temperature down. We're not throwing bringing race and gender into this is part of turning the temperature down. You either can walk the walk and talk the talk, or don't come to me with this unity talk.
And let me just say, I just want to say how absurd what Donald Trump said there was.
Yes.
He was blaming Kamala Harris, blaming Joe Biden for selecting Kamala Harris as the running mate, given all the things she criticized Joe Biden about. Have you looked at what J.D. Vance has said about Donald Trump? Like, it just makes absolutely no consistent sense what Donald Trump said there.
Once said, J.D. Vance said that Trump was America's Hitler. Doesn't get more.
And yet he picked him. So, like, it's not, I just don't understand what metric he's using.
I'll just say, I don't think the campaign has to go anywhere near any of that, right? This is, in a lot of ways, the same campaign it was last week. It comes down to the three I's: immigration, inflation, and competence. You have Kamala Harris, who's the deciding vote for the Inflation Reduction Act that actually spent trillions of dollars causing inflation. She was Biden's border czar when we've had a record number of border crossings. And in competence, she stood side by side with Joe Biden on every single foreign policy disaster we've had, including the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. She owns that record. That's all Donald Trump has to talk about. The rest will take care of itself.
She's not incompetent. Okay, like, you don't become the attorney general of California.
Or
you
a
don't
U.S. senator.
or the Vice President of the United States. By calling her incompetent, you're calling the 81 million people who voted for her incompetent as well. But let me just say this. That is what we're talking about. There is a way to attack her record on policy without calling her a name. Incompetent is an unflattering name. And when people do that to black women, that is what Van is talking about. You might not agree, but as a black woman, let me tell you how we hear it.
Well, you know who disagrees are the voters. The voters right now believe the Biden-Harris administration is one of the most incompetent administrations in American history. That's not me. That's the voters right now. And they're not just saying about the vice president. They're saying about everyone in the administration right now.
Let me get Van to respond to that. Go ahead, Van.
Well, I agree with Ashley. Look, we're going to have to learn how to talk to each other. There's certain things that if you there's a smart way and a dumb way to do anything. It's a very dumb way to after 400 years of this mistreatment of black people and black women to say you're incompetent. Maybe that makes sense to you in your world and you wouldn't take it that personally, but that has been the slur. That has been the core, that we are not worthy. We're not as smart. We're not as good. We can't do stuff. And so when you have someone who's overcome all of that again and again and again and again, and that's the word you pick, incompetent, I'm just going to tell you, it's not going to work as well for you as you think it. And what you're going to wind up doing is getting a lot of people who are not going to vote, who really did not care, who were sick of all of it. People are going to crawl through broken glass to vote against a party who says that about a black woman. Pick another word. Don't pick that one.
Two top veterans of the Biden-Harris administration, Keisha Lance Bottoms, who is now a senior advisor for the Harris campaign and a former mayor of Atlanta, and Kate Bedingfield, former White House communications director. So both of you know the president and the vice president have worked with them and campaigned for them, Mayor. You just heard the Republicans trying to define Vice President Harris as too liberal, and the statistic that I gave to the governor there, right, that she was, quote, the most liberal compared to all senators, according to GovTrack in 2019 in terms of her voting record. So, Mayor, what does this mean for her vice presidential pick? Does this really put the pressure for a moderate or centrist Democrat, or no?
Well, we know that the pick for, is completely up to Vice President Harris. And traditionally, we think about balancing out a ticket, but it's going to be her pick. All of the names that we've heard floated are certainly great, well-qualified candidates, and certainly much better candidates than J.D. Vance. What we know from the Trump campaign is that they have doubled down on this MAGA right-wing rhetoric that's not been healthy for our country. And I can just tell you the excitement that I'm seeing regarding Vice President Harris being our nominee really has exceeded my expectations and so many other people. We knew that a change would be difficult at this point in the campaign, but I'm so excited about what we're seeing and so glad to be a part of this team.
So, Kate, you know, in interviews with Senator Harris, at the time, Senator Harris, she was seen to be the leading contender to be Joe Biden's VP, right, as that whole process went through. And at one point, when I interviewed her, I asked her what Biden should be looking at for a running mate. Here's what she said.
I'm not going to tell Joe Biden what to do. I want him to pick the running mate that is best equipped to help him win, because more than anything, Joe Biden has got to win. We cannot suffer another 4 years of Donald Trump in the White House.
And obviously now she's in the same situation, trying to prevent Trump from returning to the White House, Kate, for 4 more years. So I guess in a sense, you could watch that. It's Groundhog Day. But I know from your perspective, Kate, you do have 2 Democrats that stand out to you as what you think could be the best choices. Who?
Well, I think first I would say I think everybody who has been floated would be a good choice. I think for electoral reasons, there are few. I think Mark Kelly from Arizona, I think has obviously an incredibly impressive biography. Of course, Arizona is a state that Biden won in 2020 and could potentially be part of a path to victory for Vice President Harris. You know, obviously the experience that his wife suffered through, the gun violence that she suffered through, and the work that she has done since and that he has done alongside her on gun violence, I think is a really compelling story for Democratic voters and for moderates, you know, Republican voters who want to see fewer guns on the street and see less crime, less gun crime in their communities. So I think he has a really powerful story. I also really like Governor Walz from Minnesota. I think, you know, he's a terrific communicator, you know, again, represents a blue, sometimes purple state. So if you're thinking purely about kind of the electoral politics here, I think both of them are particularly compelling. But I will say, every person who's been put forward on this list would be a great governing partner for Vice President Harris. And, there's a lot of X's and O's. People kind of work through, what is kind of the war game, what's the theory of who can help the most. And of course, that is a piece of the calculation. Of course it is. But it's also really important that the person has rapport with Vice President Harris, that they get along, that they have a trusting relationship. That is a huge part of being a successful vice presidential candidate and then vice president.
I remember when they filmed then Senator Harris getting the call from Joe Biden back in the day, Mayor Bottoms, right? And I think, am I crazy? But I remember she was in basically black workout gear with her hat on, and she gets the call. And the whole point was to show, that she's a casual, normal person, and then she gets this call. Then they didn't know each other, right? Now, they say that they now have had a very positive working relationship. She brought it up today, again, on the campaign trail. Here's what she said.
It has truly been one of the greatest honors of my life to serve as vice president to our President Joe Biden. Joe's legacy of accomplishment over his entire career and over the past 3.5 years is unmatched in modern history.
So, Mayor, do you expect to see him on the campaign trail for her, campaigning with her, as much as he would have really for himself, because he was not going to be on the campaign trail anywhere near as often as she will be?
I can't speak to what the president's schedule will be, but I can only imagine that he will continue to be her biggest cheerleader. As Kate can attest to, during our time in the White House, it was very clear that this is the Biden-Harris administration. Every single win has been celebrated by the president and the vice president, and she's been such a strong partner and leader of all of the work that's come out of this administration over the past 3.5 years. So the president had planned on having a very robust campaign schedule, so I can only anticipate that he's going to continue to go out there and do everything he can to make sure that Vice President Harris is successful.
James, you warned against Democrats anointing Vice President Harris as the nominee. You talked about wanting to see town halls all over the country with multiple candidates. That's clearly not going to happen. Are you okay with what's happening?
100%. And people have coalesced around the vice president. I'm so with her. It's 100%. 2 weeks ago might have been a different environment. As Howard Wilson said, in politics, a week is a year. So that was 2 years ago. But I am totally comfortable. The delegates already coalesced around her. The donors are there. I think she's doing very well, and I'm glad to be 100% behind her.
Alyssa, how do you think J.D. Vance is doing? Do you think President Trump is rethinking that? I mean, particularly when because the sheer volume of his old statements against Donald Trump are quite large.
There's a bit of a twofold problem. There's these past statements that are very recent, using critical language of Trump that even the fiercest never-Trumpers have used against him. There's also, as you played earlier, him saying things that if you play in a suburban swing district to female voters is just radioactive in a general election. But he's also not really catching steam on the campaign trail. At his first event, statements he made fell flat. There was kind of tepid applause throughout. And I think you're seeing oftentimes when people go from
two people liked his Mountain Dew joke.
I didn't even get it, to be honest. I was like, I'm clearly not based enough. But you see, if you take someone from being a junior senator to putting them on the national stage, they often fall flat. And now you have a much more competitive race than even just a week ago. And J.D. Vance does not add votes. It's just doubling down on MAGA.
Robbie, in a New York Times op-ed published tonight, Hillary Clinton writes, I know a thing or two about how hard it can be for strong women candidates to fight through the sexism and double standards of American politics. I've been called a witch, a nasty woman, and much worse. I was even burned in effigy. What lessons from 2016 do you think Harris should apply to this campaign?
Yeah, look, I think female candidates do face certain barriers, and among those is I think they're judged more harshly for appearing too ambitious or striving too much. And I think they played this incredibly well. You saw she came out right out the gate, said, I want to earn this nomination. They proved they had the delegates to get the nomination, at which point then she pivoted to being the presumptive nominee. And I think we're going to hear all kinds of sexist tropes. You just heard the cat lady comments coming from JD Vance. And so those will come. But I think the most important hurdle from her coming out the gate was to show that this, she wasn't just trying to grab this. She earned it. It's hers. It's stunning how quickly she assembled the political coalition to get this nomination. And I think Democrats are very united going into this.
James, who do you think she should pick as a running mate?
Oh boy, I don't know. This sounds so political. It's a ton of people, and I have every confidence that she's going to make a wise choice. I mean, there's 7 people I could think of where you couldn't go wrong with any of them. So, I think there's a little suspense in this, and they're dominating the press now, and Trump kind of knows that he's being dominated. But I think Robbie or Elizabeth are smart enough and been around long enough to know that this screw will turn, and she'll have some rougher days ahead. But for right now, man, what a ride.
Robbie, just in terms of what issues she may be most vulnerable on, I mean, obviously, immigration is something that's already she's being going to be attacked for. There's also this DEI hire line that's being used a lot by right-wing talkers on radio and on television. A couple of congressmen are now using it as well.
Well, it's obviously absurd. I mean, she is just as accomplished as any vice president. And again, I can't emphasize enough, and I think James mentioned this earlier, we weren't sure how this was going to go going into this. We weren't sure how quickly the party would coalesce. There were certainly people demanding that there be a process, and she locked this up instantly. And that wasn't, that wasn't by twisting arms. I mean, the outpouring that we're seeing on social media has been incredible. And one of the things I worried about was would the online space be a safe space for Kamala Harris, a safe space for people to express their support for her? And it overwhelmingly has. So I'm confident she can push through these barriers that will be there. It is harder for candidates of color. It is harder for women candidates. But I'm really impressed with what I'm seeing right now. This, for a campaign manager, this was a perfect 48 hours.
Alyssa, where do you think she is most vulnerable? I mean, the attack points are pretty clear right now. There's obviously going to be more developed.
I think the Trump campaign is going to frame her as too left for a general election. They're going to hit her on border security and say that the Biden administration dragged their feet for some time. They're going to pull up the fact that during 2020, she said that rioters should be bailed out in the summer of protests and try to frame her as somebody who's maybe soft on protecting law enforcement. But she's ready for these attacks. The reason she's probably the best candidate Democrats could put up is we know exactly what the playbook is. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. Trump is going to overplay his hand. He is going to lean too hard into sexist, misogynistic, and racist attacks, and it's going to turn off the very voters you need to win this election. Swing voters do not want to hear the name calling. They do not want to hear that an attorney general, senator, and vice president is a DEI hire who didn't earn her way to being on the ticket.
There's this, the Reuters Ipsos poll shows no clear leader in the Trump-Harris matchup. There's this campaign pollster for Trump predicting that Harris is going to, there's the honeymoon for Harris. Do you think that indicates, I mean, do you think he's sort of just trying to, get ahead of?
He's setting, there's some expectation setting here, but I do think there's a bump here of just people wanted someone other than the 2 candidates that were on the ticket and somebody who's taking the case to Donald Trump. And she has very effectively in the last 72 hours laid out the case. She's got the line. She's the prosecutor going against the perpetrator. Like the tagline is there. The social media and digital operation has been great. This has been faster, rapid response than we've seen from the Biden campaign this entire election, even though it's a lot of the same team. So I do think she's going to get a bump. It's going to be sustaining it for the next 3 months while the world is dumped on her. And that's where I think a VP who could sustain her and other Democratic surrogates are going to be a priority.
Robbie, when do you think a VP needs to get selected or announced? I mean, would you wait till the actual convention?
Yeah, normally you do wait till the weekend before. I could see it happening earlier here. The question is the vetting, right? There's just a practical issue of getting through that vetting. And when I went through this process with Hillary, the number one thing when you're picking a vice president Is it someone you think is qualified? Is it someone you want serving with you, to be a partner with you in being president? And that takes a little time to establish. So I think they'd be foolish to rush it. But if they have someone ready to get out the door, I'd do it. I'd keep the momentum going, keep owning the news cycle. As James said earlier, these have been some really good days. There's going to be really hard days, but that's a special moment. And if you could have that between now and the convention, that would be great.
Robbie, let me just ask you, just in terms of vetting, I mean, I'm not going to ask for any details, but like, do you find stuff on potential people that didn't? I mean, if they've won, if they're a governor or they're a senator, haven't they already kind of been vetted?
Well, and she's looking at people like that who definitely have been vetted, and certainly from a talent standpoint and a record standpoint have been vetted. But yeah, look, you occasionally find some things, but the names that you mentioned, any of these folks would be top tier. And I think it's traditional to have your list of 10. My guess is they're looking at a very short list, 3 or 4 folks very seriously.